I want to go into a presentation and talking about a show that was on here a couple of days ago. Very interesting, a very good show done by Stereo's own Dre. Okay, just Dre. He's a nice guy. We all know him and love him. And he did a show concerning research outcomes of spanking children. Research outcomes of spanking children, right? And I have a link above that I've set on. It continues on in this conversation, and it kind of separates between spanking and what is punishment and what is discipline. Understanding, I liked it because it was very concise and to the point. It talks about certain issues concerning a lot of these studies that have been done. It's a fairly recent video that's up there, and it was a talk someone talked about, and basically they got into some of the stuff I'll be covering here. But I'm a skeptic, and I have to tell you concerning that research and those outcomes, and I will present here the reason for that. Okay, I'm going to present here the reason for that. Wait a minute. Hang on a second. Okay. Yeah. So, um, and yeah, so check out that link above. It kind of gets into that concerning spanking. And the title of my message today is Spank Them If You Love Them. Okay, so let's check it out. Let's get through those scriptures, those tough scriptures that people they're intimidated about. Let's get that out of the way first and foremost and read what the goal is of the book of Proverbs, which is the book of wisdom. It tells you within the first few verses. Now, in this podcast, I'm going to be talking about why I'm skeptic concerning these case studies. I haven't read them in depth, okay? But there's a lot that I would question these things. If I were to research this, if I had the time to research this in depth, this is what I would be concerned about. I'd be concerned about how legitimate this research is and what areas it covers. But let's go into Proverbs 1, which is um, the book of wisdom. And so we could see the motive of what the Proverbs are from the very beginning, from the very first proverb. Let's read Proverbs 1, the Proverbs of Solomon, who is known to be the wisest man in the world, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. And then in Proverbs 7, it begins, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Okay? Now, let's not just glaze through that. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Okay? Now, if we hear that, we have to ask, what is that? What do you mean? The beginning of what knowledge? Now, concern yourself here with this is the Bible. These are the words of God. These are the instructions in knowing God, the first and the last of all things. This is not talking about specific things. This is talking about all-encompassing things, right? So the fear of the Lord. So when it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, we have to the fear of the Lord means recognition of God, who is the awe of God is the beginning, is where you start in order for you to have a perspective, a knowledgeable and wisdom perspective on life, death, who you are, who God is, of all things. This is all encompassing here, right? And so the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. This is the front gate of all these things in terms of discernment, of using wisdom, of prudence, all of these things. This is where you have to, this is your starting point, the recognition of God. And then it says, fools despise wisdom and instruction. Okay? If you're a fool, you're despising it. Now remember, this here doesn't mean that you're unintelligent. Okay? It's saying that you're immoral. Okay? The immoral despise learning, despise wisdom and learning, right? So you can't really, you know, you can be, you can ponder things, but what is your objective and what is your starting point? That's what I'm talking about here. This is what we're talking about. What is your objective? What are you pondering, and where are you starting from? Okay, where you start from concerning the realities of life and the truth of life, death, and logic and critical thinking, all of that has to have its beginning in the recognition of God, who is the universal and the absolute authority. Outside of that, and you can expect to be walking with a limp. You can expect to be skewed. You can expect to have less equilibrium with regard to wisdom, knowledge, knowing things, your epistemology, right? Okay, so hear my son. Listen to the Proverbs. This is the intentions of the Proverbs. Hear my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. Meaning, these are the things that your parents are giving you, and you should value them. Value them from the gate, from your youth, from the very start. Okay? Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Proverbs 22:15. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him. Proverbs 23:14 through 15 and beyond. Let's just listen to this wisdom. Listen to this intention. Listen to this purpose. Oftentimes people do not read the Proverbs before they've judged the Proverbs. Starting at verse 12. Apply your heart to instruction and your ear to words of knowledge. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. My inmost being will exult when your lips speak what is right. Let your heart envy, that not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Hear, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. Be not among drunkards or among gluttons, eaters of meat. I'm hearing some feedback, and it's bugging me. Let's get rid of that. Let me see. I might have gotten rid of it. Okay. Let's go back to, let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the days. Surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. Hear, my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way. Be not among drunkards or among gluttonous eaters of meat, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty, and slumber will clothe them with rags. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy truth and do not sell it. By wisdom, instruction, and understanding, the father of the righteous will greatly rejoice. He who fathers a wise son will be glad in him. Let your father and mother be glad. Let her who bore you rejoice. My son, give me your heart, and let your eyes observe my ways. Look at the honest intentions. Look at the wisdom and the rearing and the instruction that is given here in these words. These words where a parent is taking on the responsibility from the love they have of their child to instruct them and to discipline them. Discipline is instruction, it's education, it's prevention. You see, there's more to what the world is saying concerning spanking, concerning discipline. Spanking is only one of the means of discipline. There's also counseling, there's also exhorting, there's also admonishing, there's also encouraging. All of these things are part of discipline. When the child needs the correction, needs the strong words of discipline, you must give it to them. The Bible says if they need it and you don't give it to them, you're a bad parent. Proverbs 19:18. Discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death. Okay? What is this suggesting? This suggesting that if you do not discipline your children, you're being a bad parent. You're being a person who's permissive, a person who's a willing party to their death, meaning you're responsible because you didn't take time out to discipline your child. Proverbs 29:15. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. You see? A child left to himself. Children, a permissive parent is the one who leaves children to themselves, right? And so now let's talk about my skepticism over the wisdom and knowledge behind a lot of these studies and research that reports bad supposed outcomes of spanking. Okay? There's tons of questions to be asked. That's the problem with those studies. That's the problems with that research, right? I'll admit I haven't yet reviewed these studies, but this is pretty much where I would go and what questions I would ask of these studies. We have the outcomes within the research, but do we have the parameters used in the research themselves? There are too many variables. How are we defining punishment, discipline, and spanking? Okay, what are they calling punishment? Um, what are they calling discipline? Do they know the difference? How are they defining the difference? Do they know what outcomes are favorable? Does everyone agree that those outcomes are all good or all bad? What is the quality of the relationships of those children to their parents, like before and after spanking? What are the socioeconomic spectrums of those adults who spank their children? What are the cultural and ethnic differences, if any, of those parents and their parenting styles? How do we know the functioning level of those specific parents who were in those studies? Were they spanked also? Are they well functioning? Has any test been done to determine how well functioning they were? What were the dynamics of their parents and how they related to their parents? Since this can be a generational thing as well. Do they agree, disagree with spanking themselves? Okay. How much was spanking used for discipline versus punishment at any given time? How often was it used among those who spanked and among those who got spanked? How do we know that, or rather, what method of discipline would work on any given and individual child based on his or her personality type and relationship to their parents? Those are the questions I would ask and seek to answer if I had time to review the studies and research. So, right off the bat, we know that there is a difference between what the world considers positive outcomes and what the Bible teaches as positive outcomes. We know the standard of morality exists within a biblical teaching and a religious worldview, whereas the standard of difference between what the world considers positive outcomes and what the Bible teaches as positive outcomes. We know the standard of morality exists within a biblical teaching and a religious worldview, whereas the standard of morality within the world is shifting and subjective. Okay? Positive outcomes from the world standard is one thing, but positive outcomes for the people of God is righteousness. Speaking as a Christian, that is the goal of discipling your children. Okay, that's the goal. Righteousness. Is righteousness the goal of raising children with respect to the world? Does the world have righteousness as their standard with regard to rearing and raising uh, children? You would have to ask yourself, what do we see in the world today? That's exhibit A. What we see today in an ever so growing secularized society is the outcome of that society, of those values. Okay, is that what we're seeing? Are we seeing greater functioning in a great rising secularist society, or were we seeing the opposite? Okay, let's see those stats. Okay, so the question is, how can we know and record and decipher what is the goal or the reason or level of functioning of the parent to the severity of the outcome for why they spank their child, and taking into consideration the individual personality of the child being spanked? That's a lot of variables to cover, right? That's a lot of, did they cover all those variables when they did these studies? Did they consider them important? What were they looking for? And what they were looking for, is this truly what people, everyone should look for? Are they punishing the child or disciplining the child? And does the research see beyond the mere spanking? Probably not. I would say that the positive outcome of spanking might get lost in a sea of all these unanswered questions and among the bulk of the negative outcomes being reported. It was mentioned that corporal punishment on children was and is fostered on via religion. In the Western world, that religion would be Christianity. And indeed, the Bible says a lot about discipline and punishment. The instruction for disciplining children, however, is found within the book of Proverbs, which is the main book of wisdom. The book of Proverbs is specifically there for parents to train up a child in the way they should go. But the book of Proverbs isn't saying spank them like there's no tomorrow, or spank them like it's a sport, or spank them every day. It's saying that parenting is hard, and it's your responsibility as a parent. Train your child in the way they should go, and when they grow up, they won't depart from it. Assuming that you're training them up in the ways of the Lord, in righteousness, right? For integrity, right? That's Proverbs 22:6. It teaches, and it's assumed that you are a functional parent. It's not talking about everything across the board concerning everyone who spanks their child. No, it's speaking from the context of a functioning and a righteous parent, right? Well functioning. Okay? That's what it's speaking about. It teaches that along with food, love, attention, if your child needs discipline and you don't provide it, you don't truly love your children. If they need it, give it to them. Don't deprive them of discipline. But spanking falls under the umbrella of discipline. It's not the end all be all of discipline. Teaching, training, leading, lecturing, advising, counseling, admonishing, exhorting, reprimanding, rebuking, advocating, educating, preventing, encouraging, all have to do with discipline, not just spanking. If you don't give your child any of those things, now you see how you can't love your children. Instead, you'd be permissive and a derelict parent, right? That's what the book of Proverbs is teaching. The world doesn't know God. The world rejects the ways of God. The world rejects godly instruction, the ways of the Spirit, and how it interacts with our very humanity is seen as foolishness by the world. The Word of God speaks clearly about the wisdom of the world and its inability to understand God because of their rejection of God. It's not that the world doesn't understand God, therefore it rejects God, but instead the opposite. It rejects God and therefore can't understand God. I will be taking messages after my presentation. So let's look at 1 Corinthians 2:14. Welcome to everyone, to Jay, to Shalom, and to Chris. Oh, we missed Chris. Okay, the natural person, this is 1 Corinthians 2:14, the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. 1 Corinthians 1, Christ, the wisdom and power of God. Verse 18, for the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and the discernment of the discerning. I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of the sage? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, It pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For the Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified as stumbling block to the Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. Okay, you see the vastness and the separation between the mightiness and the wisdom and the knowledge of God in separation. When you separate yourself from the knowledge and the understanding of a universal truth, like that is of the God worldview, you cut yourself off, you skew yourself, you're not in equilibrium, you're sideways, you're limping, you're not well, you're missing, you're lacking. Okay? That's the point. Okay, so when the judgment of the world comes along with its research and its studies, you kind of have to look at it like, Psalm 111:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. All those who practice it have a good understanding. His praise endures forever. Proverbs 9:10. The fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Colossians 2:3. Christ himself, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Okay? Again, when we're talking about these things, he's not talking about knowledge of mechanics or knowledge of physics. He's talking about the treasures of wisdom and knowledge if we take into context of who he's speaking of. He's speaking of deity. Okay? What's the knowledge and the treasures of wisdom and knowledge that a deity would encompass? It would encompass all things now, wouldn't it? Right? This is how we should read this. Verse 8, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, and not according to Christ. For in him all the fullness of deity dwells bodily. First, you have to ask yourself, what is your authority? Okay, that's what is your authority? What is your end all be all? Who are you listening to, and by what standard? Okay, is it God or is it the world? Where are we going to take our wisdom and knowledge and instruction from? The world or God? Wherever you decide, you're going to have to dig deep and compare the fundamentals of that authority and objective grounding of those social and ethical parameters. For instance, what does the world know and teach and preach about really fundamental things like knowledge, truth, ethics, and purpose? How well does the world system do within these categories? 1 John 19. We know that we are from God, and the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. Okay? The whole world is being run and it's influenced by the evil one. This is the claim of the scriptures. What is this discipline for? First of all, it's a command of God and our responsibility, not to the schools, not to the state, not to the uncles or the aunts. Discipline teaches respect for authority figures. Okay? If anyone's going to teach you how to respect your employer, okay, the fire marshal, the police, your teachers, your professors, it's going to be your own parents. That's where it starts. Okay? I tell my kids, you respect the person when they sit in a certain seat. You respect them because of their post, where they are, their authority. Okay? Understand that. And that's how we know they're not doing their authority well or they're not representing themselves well because of the standard we give to the authority or the post or the parameters of their position, right? Discipline teaches humility, the opposite of getting your way. Discipline teaches trust. You can trust authority figures, right? It teaches you're able to do that by way of discipline, right? If your father is a moral person, if your father is fair, if your father is the one who teaches and loves you, even if he has to spank you, you will come to recognize that what he did was for your own good. Okay? Discipline teaches positive mindset, how to work hard against laziness, right? Discipline teaches how to hold your tongue, be patient, resist impulsivity, self and mental discipline. That's only going to come through discipline. Okay? And where does it start? Where's the ground zero if not in the nuclear family, in the home? The state ain't going to teach you that. The school system ain't going to teach you that. And as sure as heck you don't want to depend them to. Okay? Discipline teaches appropriate roles, how to be a big brother, how to be a father, mother, sister, how to take charge and responsibility, how to be dependable, how to respect yourself, respect others, recognize other people's needs. Discipline teaches humility and how and when to lead. It teaches the difference between being a server and a leader. Discipline teaches how to learn. Discipline sets healthy barriers. Parenthood is the first source of learning for all children. Parenthood is hard. Parenting is hard work. Disciplining children is difficult, but it's needed, and it falls strictly on the parent by way of God's standard. A well-functioning adult, a well-functioning marriage will produce well-functioning children. You don't need research to tell you this. But if you can't discipline your children, you ruin the cycle of order within the home. If you lump in what the world will define as punishment along with discipline, which is what the world is trying to do, okay, you disrupt the nucleus of the household. If we produce well-functioning adults, those adults will raise well-functioning children, who then in turn produce well-functioning adults. Parents, not the state, are the first source of order, discipline, love, children have. And examples, not the state. The state doesn't care for children, and especially as much as their own parents. The state has its own concerns and goals. Discipline, character, building, and integrity isn't something the world has ever done well outside of a well-functioning mother and father. When there is no discipline, society crumbles. You're not going to learn discipline from the world, and if you don't get it from your upbringing, you're probably not going to get it from anywhere else. Finally, discipline is necessary to survive in the real world of cold and callous reality. Let's read Hebrews chapter 12. I want you to see the lining between biblical, the understanding of God and the wisdom of God, and how it is to play into the wisdom of the nuclear family. Okay? The nuclear family becomes the representation of the reality of God and his wisdom and his discipline. You see? It's almost like joining heaven on earth within the structure of the family structure, the family nucleus. Okay? Hebrews chapter 4, do not grow weary. Verse 3, consider him who endured for sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood, and have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. You see, this is the goal. Discipline, not only in the home, for the right goals. Basically, it comes down to the same thing, for righteousness. Do you want to have a righteous son? Do you want to have a righteous daughter? Okay? Is that the goal of the world? Does the state care about righteousness? Okay, are they producing an army of humility, soldiers of empathy, soldiers of love? Not from what I'm seeing. So we know that the message of the world is contrary to the message of God. The world's sense of direction with respect to justice is skewed. The world sees promiscuous sexuality as acceptable, not perverted. The world sees child sacrifice in the womb as a woman's right to murder. The world denies the humanity of human in the womb. The world once believed black humans were three-fifths of a human beings. The world sees acceptable what God calls an abomination, and it lumps in discipline with punishment in order to put a foot in the door of parental control and define what abuse is. Okay? This is a avenue that they will go. Because of this definition of what is good slash bad, they could easily declare it illegal to spank children in some places. This is the case. So it's a way to have the state come into your home whom they deem dangerous and mess with your rights as a parent. All they have to do is lump you in and slander you as an abuser, and they can come in and remove your children. Okay? Is it too difficult to believe that the state would do that? I think not. Believe me, there are those who do not want to produce well-functioning, thoughtful, and critical thinking adults who have integrity and are raised with a sense of high purpose and strong convictions to justice, fairness, morality. That's a threat to some people, believe it or not. Some people in power, that is. And where are you going to find people raising people like this? Not in a culture where life, truth, and morality is subjective. That's a damn sure. Not typically, I would say, not in our society. Instead, what is it that we see in a growing secularist society as exhibit A? A lot of suicide, no hope, low sense of value and purpose, a lot of single parents, less respect for parents, more incarceration, less sanctity of human life, self and others, abortions, sexual deviance, confusion, identity problems. Oh my goodness. The list is long. The diverting back to paganism. That's what we see. Okay? The fruit of a growing secularized society. Less discipline in the home, less nuclear family instruction, discipline and maturity, self-control, direction, values, purpose. Last verse to share. Revelation 3:19. Those of whom I love I reprove and discipline. Therefore, be zealous and repent. So in discipline, you are to be humble and become zealous, right? To have hope, understanding that discipline creates character, right? That's what it's about. When it's done correctly, when it's done functionally, right? So these researches, these all of these things, my question is, from what source are they coming from? That's the point. Reproving and disciplining are good things for good purposes, and the goal is righteousness. Mark 8:36 through 7 to 37. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? The world will find you functional if you attain riches and worldly power and prestige, and this is how they consider a quote unquote high value person. The wisdom of the world is lacking, is bankrupt and empty. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Okay, so that's my show. That's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. It's recorded here, and without a doubt, now I will listen to this message.
Should we stone our children if they're rebellious or stubborn?
Let's listen to that again.
Should we stone our children if they're rebellious or stubborn?
Yes, actually, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up and you reminded me. That demonstrates the severity of what it looks like to have a rebellious child. In other words, that is put upon the responsibility of the parent, because just like the proverb that I read, that if you do not discipline your child, right, there's a good chance that your child will become like that, will become spoiled and rotten, lack of respect, cursing their own mother and father, right? And so the severity that we saw in the scriptures, where the stoning of sin, where the stoning of disobedience to God, that example in the Old Testament still carries on today, and it demonstrates to you what is the utmost and the possible trajectory of a child that is not disciplined. So, in other words, the Old Testament that you were referring to actually demonstrates for us today the severity of what could happen to your child when he loses his soul or ends up incarcerated or ends up on drugs. You see what I'm saying? That is the point. I'm glad you brought that up. In the Old Covenant, they would drag a child like that, they would drag a young man that way, and they would stone him at the gates, right? They would not incarcerate them for forever and pay for his incarceration coming out of your taxes. No, they would get rid of him and use that as an example to demonstrate to the society, don't be like this guy. Okay? Some people believe that's a pretty good uh, way to divert situations, right? From things from happening. When you see something go wrong, you cut it off at the root quickly, right? So not everyone agrees with that, but where are we with regard to our understanding of biblical things? And so that I made my argument, Lady Usurp. I'm sorry you came late to the presentation, but I encourage you to listen back to the podcast. I linked a brief conversation up here concerning the difference between discipline and punishment. The Bible doesn't isn't talking about punishment when it's talking about disciplining children and raising them up in the way they should go. That's not. It makes a clear distinction of those things, right? And so, discipline has to do with judgment. I mean, punishment has to do with judgment, and discipline has to do with training, with training up a child in the correct way, correcting, admonishing, training, prevention, education. All of those things are what um, uh, disciplining is all about. And if it gets to the spanking part, it is necessary because a child will. I mean, I've got 3 kids. They're not all the same. Where do you see a cookie cutter system approach? You often see that within the state run schools. Everyone needs to be treated equally the same. This whole idea that all of them are all the same. That they don't really do well with regard to recognizing individuality between children. Usually, when you see the state, you see everybody operating in line, in step, everyone the same portions, the same uh, rules for all people. You see, and so you recognize that children are different. If you've got more than one child, you'll recognize that one child is different than the other, and so um, um, not all kids will have to be disciplined in the same way, or you use the same tactic for every child. It's just not the way it is. I had I was one of 4 brothers and sisters. Actually, there were 5 of us, and not all of us learned the same way. Not all of us needed to be spanked as much as others. Not all of us needed to be reproved as much as others. There is distinction because there are different personality types. These studies do not take into consideration. They usually tend to cookie cutter people and consider them all the same. Okay, so yeah. So if there are any questions, Shalom, you usually have some interesting questions. You're definitely free to ask them. If not, I will shut down the podcast and come back up some other time, without a doubt. But this is very important. It's very important that we recognize that the world is has its messaging and it's always directing us in a certain direction. It always wants us to see things a certain way. But what is the grounding of all these things? What is the purpose? What is the authority? Why should uh, what is the definition of someone who's well functioning? What does that mean? Who's calling the shots? Who's got the ruler? Who's got the measurement? Right? Who says? Right? What is considered high value? A high value person, a well functioning person. Is it someone who's able to work a job and they make good money and they were able to become an accountant? Is I guess that person's well functioning, right? Or a businessman or whatever? Yeah, we've seen many of people who are intelligent who also lack integrity or responsibility in other areas, who are completely immoral. So it can't be their intelligence, it can't be their ability to. Bernie Madoff. Look at Bernie Madoff, a very intelligent man, knew his finances, but he was lacking in other areas, obviously. So somebody would have judged him based on his early success, and they would have said, "This man is high functioning. He's a well-off man. And put a lot of stock into his accomplishments, right? But that's not the way the Bible measures completion. Okay, it measures completion by way of righteousness, right? And so when it talks about the fool gets many lashes, it's talking about morality. A person who doesn't want to take instructions is not talking about a person who is non-intelligent, but a person who is stubborn, who's stiff-necked. A person that the Bible describes that way is a person who is willingly stubborn, a person who doesn't want to take instruction, who doesn't want to buckle to the authority of the wisdom and knowledge of their parents. That has to do with morality. It doesn't have to do with intelligence. Okay, so yeah, so I get that. That's it. That's pretty much all I have today. And at least right now, thanks for joining me. Shalom for sticking out with this one. I wanted Mr. Dre to come by, and maybe he might have had some questions that I could have directed back to him. But this is really uh, inspired by a talk that he did concerning research outcomes um, of spanking children and why it's bad. It says that it decreases their intelligence. It makes them mentally, emotionally dysfunctional to a certain extent. But my question is, there are many parameters that have to be taken into consideration before we recognize that we should not be spanking our children as part of the arsenal for that we have for disciplining them, right? And disciplining is not just spanking. Disciplining is an overall thing that we do, that we need to do, and is our responsibility before God, right? That's what it's all about. Okay, so yeah, so thanks for joining me today, and I might be on later on. Until next time, God bless. All right, thanks for watching the Divine Nature Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and like and share if you care. Until next time, God bless.